Let's talk about Bitcoin first and then stocks. I remember last time you were on the show, a couple of weeks ago, you were calling for a top in Bitcoin of $52,000. Miraculously, it got to exactly $52,000 before taking a slide.
In the short term, what you're probably going to do is go test this head and shoulders neckline. It's what we call a retrace to the scene of the crime. So I still think you have upside to about 50 to 52,000. And for sure, I mean, so what we've seen here is a technical retrace. And this is what I've been talking about for those of you that have been following my Bitcoin analysis, is that generally when you have a breakdown in a trend, so you have this trend line here, this was that big head and shoulder breakdown to 30,000. There's a tendency for any chart, doesn't have to be Bitcoin, it could be anything, but it's a tendency to go back to what we call the scene of the crime, which is the breakdown trend line. So you can see all this chop here, a lot of bearishness, then people started to get more confident buying Bitcoin up, then bullishness exuded in the Bitcoin cryptocurrency market, getting you right back to that trend line. And then all of a sudden, miraculously, the charts trigger a sell-off, and again, whether it's Walmart and Litecoin, whether it's El Salvador or whatever it may be, the key is the chart can often lead you there ahead of the news. And you don't know what the news is going to be, but ultimately it does show us more often than not that a fall was going to come here, and that's exactly what it did. And then we're seeing, again, a follow-through today. We haven't really taken out the low pivot from that down day. That's the technical level I'm watching right now. If that gets taken out, then you're likely going down to around the 40 to 41,000 level right here, and then all the way down to 30,000. And you guys know my longer term projections. Even though you're going to see lots of bounces, and it could be 3, 6, maybe even 9 months, eventually you're going to get to the 18 to 20,000 marker on Bitcoin.
18 to 20,000 marker. So you're long-term bearish.
All right. So to phrase this correctly, I'm near-term to mid-term bearish, extreme bullish long-term. So for me, Bitcoin is the future, cryptocurrency is the future, blockchain is the future, but it just needs to wash out this. I mean, there's so much liquidity, and one of the things that I've talked about in previous interviews is how there was going to be a liquidity crisis, there was going to be a deleveraging crisis that was going to trigger the fall in not only stocks but also in cryptocurrencies. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, we see this Evergrande situation developing in China, which basically 300 billion in debt that looks like it's about to default. We'll see if the Chinese government comes out and saves the day. But that's the deleveraging event that could be starting it. I don't think it's going to cause a crash overall, but I think it's the beginning. It's kind of like a tremor before the big quake hits, if you will.
What does Evergrande have to do with crypto markets, though?
So what's amazing about it is that stocks, commodities, it's all tied together, right? So you have all this money that has been going to other assets outside of currencies, essentially, outside of the dollar, to get away from, the printing of money that the Federal Reserve has done. So, I mean, how many times have we talked about how no one wants to be in dollars? They all want to invest in the stock market, because at least in the stock market, you can get upside in stocks, you can get dividends and so forth. If your money is sitting in an account, you're losing money because of inflation, especially with inflation these days. So what happens is all this liquidity gets pushed into the market. The Fed, the government's been sending checks to individuals. It's all going into cryptocurrencies and stocks. And you're seeing the leverage. You're getting so much leverage out there, whether it's 4-to-1 margin, whether it's 10-to-1. Sometimes I've even heard crazy things like 100-to-1. And what happens when you get a deleveraging event like in China, it scares people and they pull back. And all that has to happen is a pullback causes a downshift, which then triggers margin calls, which then causes more selling. And it's kind of like a snowball effect to the downside.
Okay. All right, let's go back to cryptocurrencies and your targets. Long-term bullish. What exactly do you mean by long-term? After 6 months, after 12 months, in 5 years? What do you mean?
Yeah, so, again, the timing is so hard. I would say in 5 years, you're looking at north of 100,000, and then probably within 10 years, 500,000 on Bitcoin. Ether is going to be a huge player as well, although I do think the NFT craze right now is a bubble and has to be washed out. I also think that a lot of the altcoins, I think you'll have some altcoins surviving, but the altcoins remind me of the dot-coms, and for those of us that traded through and lived through the dot-com bubble and burst know that a lot of those dot-coms went away and were no longer around. But I do think that, again, you have to start thinking that the longer term is a shift away from fiat currencies into cryptocurrencies, into gold, into things that you cannot just print out of a printing press like the Federal Reserve and the government essentially is doing.
Hold on. Let's rewind here now, Gareth.
Yeah.
Okay, so Bitcoin went from 10,000 to over 50,000 in less than a year last year. Now you're saying it's going to take 5 years to climb to 100,000, which is about double where it's at currently. Are you telling me that the biggest runs in crypto are more or less done? Is that what I'm
in the short term, right? So let's look at cycles, right? So if you look at the high pivot on Bitcoin, and by the way, this is a great segue. We'll get right back into that question. But when we're looking at, a lot of people were asking me why Bitcoin is rallying here and then why is it going to collapse? And one of the things that on a technical basis, and remember, I'm a technical trader, is that I've been focusing on is previous cycles. So if we go to the 2013 cycle, all right, where you had this massive run up in Bitcoin where you topped out around 1,250. Look at the pullback. It went to 500. It then had the huge bounce to 1,100 and then dipped all the way down to 100. So liken that to what we've seen recently. We saw 65,000, which would have been the equivalent right here. Then the dip to 30,000, which was the equivalent of 500. Then the rally to 52 to 53,000 here. And the idea is that you should roll over here and go to the downside. Now, again, that's just one of the cycle moves in Bitcoin. But let's take a look at the 2017 move. 2017 move rallies up to 20,000, corrects to 11,000. You then get the bounce back to 17, and then a move down to 5,000 or sub 5,000 before it kind of bottomed out and then started to move. Another key pivot here is that if you look at the years between high pivots, so the high pivot was 2013. 4 years later, 2017. 4 years later, 2021. So my idea is that you'll likely have about 4 to 5 years from the 65,000 high before you get above and break to 100,000. And that's kind of where I'm getting that, just to go back to your question of where I believe that it'll take that long for Bitcoin to go back to about 100,000 or north of 100,000.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's revisit your 52,000 call again, Gareth, because I know it was a while ago since you made that call. Can you explain again the trend lines that you were looking at that had projected 52,000?
Sure, absolutely. So here the initial call, and this is one of the ones from months ago where you had me on, and I made this call, and then you had me on to talk about it. Was that you had a very distinctive head and shoulder pattern here? So shoulder, head, and shoulder. And basically what you do is you connect the neckline, which is the base here, to this base. And when you break down, you get a target range of the same as this high with a drop line straight to this. That's an even, basically what we call a measured move down to here. And that gave me that 30,000 target. Once target is achieved, technically and psychologically, you're apt to see a retrace where bulls start to say and think to themselves, especially when price goes sideways, okay, the worst is over. You're going to start to see the market rally up. They slowly get more and more bullish. One of the key pivots was when you could take out this high around 40,000, and that really led to that continued move up. Once you get up here, this is a level where this big down move began, right? So that's a tendency for people that were buying all the way over here to say, okay, I have now gotten my money back. I'm essentially whole. My pie is whole. My money is back to where it was. I'm going to exit. And that's why this line oftentimes is a good trigger for a sell. It's amazing how it works. I can't explain necessarily all the nuances of it. But again, draw that trend line, right? I mean, look at the beautiful trend line right there, connecting these lows. And then it just so happens that that was the high on Bitcoin, a couple weeks ago.